Welcome to Unity Now, the podcast where we discuss unity stemming from the Unity 2020 plan with one goal in mind: bring unity to America and end the Republican-Democrat duopoly. This podcast is created, produced, hosted, recorded, edited, and publicized by a wonderful team of Unity volunteers that came together from all over the country to collaborate in a completely remote environment. To provide a brief introduction to Unity, we offer this. Unity 2020 was an idea that started when Brett Weinstein announced the plan on the Joe Rogan Experience in mid-June 2020. From there, the movement was born, and since then, tens of thousands of volunteers have signed up, organized, and begun to create a groundswell of support. The plan always introduced a fail-safe so we would not be an election spoiler. This was to end the plans for the 2020 election if it was determined there was no viable path to the White House. Sadly, this became the case. In keeping our promise, this fail-safe was executed and announced by Brett Weinstein. However, we believe Unity continues to be the number one antidote for what ails the country right now, and so we are pressing on with a renewed spirit. To learn more and become a volunteer, visit articlesofunity.org and check out Brett Weinstein's YouTube page and the Articles of Unity YouTube page for the weekly campfires.
Welcome back to Unity Now podcast. I'm co-host Gabe Garber with a brief introduction for the episode you're about to hear. In this special crossover episode of Unity Now, which originally appeared on theEWpodcast by our very own Eric White, host Toby Davis sat down with Eric for a chat across the political aisle. Toby voted for Trump back in 2016, while Eric voted for Hillary, and here they discuss their political leanings. For a little bit of context, this conversation originally took place and was recorded back in November of 2020. And we've decided to feature it here at Unity Now because we believe it exemplifies the nature of dialogue that we need in order to bring our republic back from the brink. Namely, having compassionate and reasonable conversations with people with whom we might disagree. After all, this is why our team of volunteers has dedicated so much time and energy into the podcast. We hope you enjoy this conversation as much as we did.
All right. I am here with Toby Davis. How's it going, Toby?
Good, Eric. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for agreeing to do this. I've been looking forward to having this conversation. I think it's going to be useful.
Likewise. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. So I guess to get us started off, in the intro, I will have provided some background about how we met. And, how this conversation came to be, but maybe you can just give us some background about yourself. Where do you fall into this whole political sphere? Today we're going to be talking about kind of trying to meet in the middle here. You're a conservative, I'm a liberal. And so the goal is going to be finding common ground and having a reasonable discussion. So can you just give some background on who you are?
Sure. So I'm from Indiana, born and raised in rural Indiana, so basically out in the cornfield in the middle of nowhere. And even though I was born in Denver, Colorado, we moved when I was a year old, so all I've really known is Indiana. And growing up in kind of the sticks, as you would call it, we never really talked about politics a lot. So I just kind of went about my life, and you could probably say that area is definitely conservative, sort of a Republican. Just people that enjoy freedom. They're out spreading, they're spread out, and a lot of people have a lot of land and a lot of farming, of course. And I moved to Indianapolis in probably around my 18th or 19th birthday. Basically started to look for education, look for work. And basically that led me to staying around Indianapolis and staying in kind of the city life, but more so the suburban life. And as I got older and I got into my late 20s and early 30s is really when I started to pay attention to the political landscape more and more. Which is, I'm actually sometimes embarrassed to even say that. It's like, why didn't I know any better before that time? And during that time, even though I was in Indianapolis, which in Indiana, if you don't know, Indianapolis is one of the few areas which usually leans left or Democrat. Even though I was in that sort of bubble, I ended up in a Republican sort of bubble and listened to local conservative radio stations, listened to Fox News. The people that I was surrounded with, be it family or coworkers, were mostly Republican. Even if politics came up, it was mostly about Republicans, that sort of thing, and developed kind of that team mindset that we all have. And of course, this coincided with social media and getting on Facebook and eventually getting on Twitter. I think I got on Twitter around 2010, 2011, something like that. And so, of course, then the people that I would follow or seek out to follow would be the same people in my echo chamber, Republican, conservative sort of mindset. And sometime before the 2016 election, I started to pay attention locally to, this might sound silly as it relates to politics, but local sportscasters that were, I would say, not the normal type of sportscasters, because they told the truth no matter what, and no matter what it meant for them, their ability to get guests on their show from the local sports teams, that sort of thing. And I really enjoyed that versus the normal kind of sportscasters that really just were like homers for the home team and did everything they can to make sure they didn't upset anybody locally, to make sure they could keep their ratings up, make sure they could keep getting guests on their show. And this was a long time from getting to Unity in the background there, but it eventually led to finding people like Simon Sinek. And then that led to the kind of the intellectual dark web. And that was like kind of a rabbit hole down YouTube sort of event where I discovered the people like Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan and Brett Weinstein. And that's kind of led to my political awakening, as it were. My day job, believe it or not, has nothing to do with politics and nothing to do with Unity, and maybe it is believable because I think you're probably in the same boat. I'm actually director of operations for a information management company called GRM Information Management, and it's a fairly large, mid-sized company, and that has really nothing to do with the political landscape, and that's why I call it my day job. So. Yeah. That's why that led me into the political awakening, kind of led me into starting my own podcast, and led me to the Unity movement, which is, of course, where you and I met.
Mm-hmm. Nice, man. There's a few things in there that we have in common that it's interesting that I didn't know about you. The first one is I'm also from a very rural part of Pennsylvania, where I grew up outside of Pittsburgh. There was lots of farming, a lot of space between houses. It was very rural. So I can agree. I can totally relate to your upbringing in that way. And I think it's interesting how two people can grow up in maybe similar areas, but develop different politics. And that's probably a function of, parents and upbringing, even though the area that I grew up in was relatively conservative. The other things that we have in common are my political awakening, as you say. It definitely happened within the last, within Trump's presidency. So before 2016, I was just always vote blue the whole way down the ticket. Just vote for the Democrats. Don't even think about it. Don't really look into policies. And then just within the last 4 years, it's kind of been like, oh, wait a minute. I sometimes agree with conservatives.
Yeah.
There's like some things that that frighten me about the left, to be frank. And so, I think, that kind of shaking awake that we both experienced is exactly how we met in Unity, right? And maybe we can give some background here on what Unity is and how we met. Do you want to put it into your own words, what Unity is?
Sure, I can give it a try. And and I can second what you said about always voting for the Republicans without ever even exposing myself to what the other side had to offer. And I think that's probably the most stark realization I had when I had what I call the political sort of awakening, where I decided I would not ever be labeled, at least voluntarily, as a Republican anymore. It's like I would be labeled as me, as Toby. It's like, my name is Toby. Nice to meet you. Let's have a discussion if you want about any certain topic. But you will never label me as a group as far as I'm concerned. And that led me to, actually listening to folks that would typically lean left, like Brett Weinstein. And of course, that's where we got to unity, or that's how we got to unity. So Brett Weinstein announced his idea. I think he originally called it a dark horse duo. And he first really publicly announced it on the Joe Rogan Experience in June of 2020. And I think like me, you eventually heard about that through one form or the other, maybe on that podcast, maybe on his Twitter page, or different social media. And we both joined the movement, so to speak, volunteered by signing up at articlesofunity.org. And you're given then an email, and then kind of you're invited to a Slack channel, which, this whole thing has exposed me to things I never even knew existed, like Discord and Slack and things like that. And so on the Slack channel, you're in a group of 2,000 plus people that are all there for the same reason, which is to unify the country. And they've all sort of had that, quote unquote, political awakening. And then shortly thereafter, there was a podcast team announced or started as the Unity Now podcast. And I think I jumped on fairly quickly. And I jumped on as the video editor, and eventually got to be a host as well. And I think you came shortly thereafter, and we are now team members on the Unity Now podcast.
Yeah. And I just want to stress kind of what the objective of Unity is, as I see it. And, I think it started off as an attempt to get a liberal and a conservative on the same ticket for the presidential election of 2020.
Yeah, I guess I did mention that. Go ahead.
It's all good. But obviously that was a little late. It was a long shot to begin with. And now, the pivot isn't quite clear, I don't think, yet. I think it's still being worked on. But to me, what it represents is just a movement to bring the two sides together and to help us realize that we have more in common and we'll be better off if both sides are equally supported or equally represented, I guess is the better word, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's some literal representation you can glean from, again, Brett's original idea of to bring somebody from the center right, center left, or just bring a liberal and a conservative together, which is the natural kind of historical sense of the yin and yang, or order and chaos. Jordan Peterson is the one that probably helped me understand this evolutionary sense and need for the right and left, and how it doesn't just refer to the American Republican Democrat parties. It refers to more of a sense of order and a sense to keep the things you know and understand. And then the left is more of a sense of chaos, but is exploring what we don't know yet, and is moving us forward, being progressive. And the two working together in a symbiotic sort of relationship is always best, and has always been the best way to move anything along, whether that's a society, or it's you in your personal life, or it's your family. It really applies to so many different things.
Yeah, I agree. And that's one thing that I love about Brett's analysis of the need for both sides. Is he always says, you can't have one side in control, or, if liberals are just in control and they have everything, shit's going to get crazy. We're going to make a ton of decisions that we're not going to know the consequences of. If conservatives are just in control, nothing's ever going to change. So right. I like that analysis. And I think, I mentioned before that, there are some things on the left that frighten me, and particularly right now. I recently had Dr. Watts on, the historian. We talked about the fall of Rome, and one of the things that he was really, I think, shared some of my fear about was the left pushing for things like getting rid of the filibuster, wanting to pack the courts, these things that are being done or being pitched in this kind of tit for tat, Republicans got to nominate Amy Coney Barrett, so we're going to pack the court, and it's like that doesn't work. I wonder, is there ever been a point where you kind of feared what the right was doing? Do you share that kind of same feeling on your side?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for the same reasons, I fear their reactions most of the time. It's we always have to win, so we always have to one up the other side. So it's like when we think about the election right now, for instance. We're of course recording this on the 11th of November. We should be long past the election by now, but sadly we are not, and it's because we now have a partisan effort to either define Joe Biden as the winner without considering the actual finalized results, because it's pretty close. And then the other side, the Republican side, you have the need to call the entire election fraudulent. And it's like, depending, again, just like everything else, depending on who you listen to, whether it's somebody like Ted Cruz, who's very vocal right now, or you listen to somebody like Andrew Yang, who's very vocal right now, you hear a very different side of the story and a different focus on things. So things that concern me with Republicans are, I think it's more of the conservative / religious views. When you get into certain things like the fear with like abortion, for instance, the fear and this is one of the things with Amy Coney Barrett, right, is that Roe v. Wade can be overturned and abortion is going to be outlawed across the country. And that's a fear I have with Republicans, and especially at least the perception of conservative Republicans is that they're going to use that religious belief to make that a law. And I don't know if that's the case. I don't know if that's really something that's going to happen. To me personally, it's something that is that, talk about a subject that needs nuance and a discussion. I mean, my God, that's something. And when I talk about with my wife, when I ask her what her beliefs or opinions are on something like that, I end up saying, well, I don't even want to be, I'm staying out of that. Like, I don't know that I should get a vote in that sort of conversation, or get a say in that kind of conversation, and because I'm not a woman and I don't know, there's so many different scenarios to consider in a situation like that. So it's things like that. It's the ultra conservative, ultra religious sort of look at things, where you're trying to, in a sense, you think you are doing the right thing, but you're also then potentially limiting rights. And that's not really a conservative sort of sense when you really unpack it.
I like that you brought that up, because I'm in the same boat. I'm like, I have my opinion on it, but who am I? I'm a man. I shouldn't be telling women what they can do, and that's kind of my default position on it. But I do think that, like you said, there's so much nuance there, and that is one example of a place where having a liberal and a conservative represent their ideas and find compromise is probably very important. I don't want to be telling women what to do, but I also think that there does need to be lines drawn with that. My libertarian side wants to just say, let each person decide. And that's kind of, whenever I don't really know, that's what I'm going to default to. I'm just going to say, let the individual decide for themselves. But at the same time, like, there's good cases to be made why there should be a certain line, a certain developmental line on that. And, I don't know if we want to go too far down this road, because we've both pled to not be involved with this decision. But
Right.
I think that's just one example. My point is that is just one example of something where one side shouldn't be making this decision, where we need to come together, hear each other out, and make the best decision for everybody, and maybe it just needs to be a case by case basis thing. Maybe we can't make a one decision rather.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the other things that bothers me, and this is from both sides, is the inability to say when you don't know enough about something to voice what your opinion is or what your stance is. So this is where I say I am not qualified to speak on this topic whatsoever. So that's where I would, to your question, should we go down this road? I would say no, because that's where it probably ends for me. And I agree with you. I normally kind of shade toward the libertarian side of things. And that's especially when it comes to personal rights in any way, shape, or form. And I would almost say that I shade more libertarian now than I do conservative. But maybe that would be pending a discussion on a lot of different topics.
Yeah, for sure. And also defining what you mean by, libertarian and conservative, because I think conservative has a lot of people think a lot of different things when they think conservative,
Right.
But there is something here I want to kind of touch on that I've been thinking about as being really important for me, and that is hearing both sides. You mentioned sitting in an echo chamber, only hearing one side, or no, you mentioned if you listen to Andrew Yang, you're going to get one story, and if you listen to Ted Cruz, you're going to get one story. But I think the point is to listen to both, right? And I in my daily life make it a point to listen to, I watch the Rising on the Hill, where you have a liberal and a conservative representing views. I also listen to Ben Shapiro, and I listen to Brett Weinstein, and I try, I think by listening to people you might think you disagree with, you can, one, find common ground, but also two, better define what you think. Because if you hear the other argument and you still don't agree with it, then you know your argument a little bit better, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. You can begin to, this is from my standpoint, I get a lot of this from Jordan Peterson. There was a time in my life where my wife would get upset at me because everything I would say to her was in the mindset of Jordan Peterson. I would mention him. She's like, don't you have your own thoughts? But yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think he puts it best. He talks about that idea right there where listening to somebody who might know something that you don't. First of all, you have to admit there could be many, many things you don't know instead of always having the answers. That's, for a lot of people, that's the first step, and that's the hardest one. And that's what I had to stop and realize for myself is that, I'm at the time I was approaching 40 years old, and now I am 41, and it's like there are so many things I don't know, and there's, that's never going to change. It's like I could read 1,000 books from now until the day I die, and there'll be tens of thousands of other books that I would never have touched and would never have an idea about. But once you can accept that there are things you don't know, then you can listen to someone else who maybe you don't even know yet that they disagree with you, but if they do, that's fine. You have to stop and listen as though that person knows what they're talking about and has something to add to the conversation. Because at the very least, it can help you strengthen your argument against opposing views. And if you never work to strengthen your arguments, then why are your arguments worth listening to in the first place? Why have them at all if you don't know what you're arguing against? So, but you also might learn something, and you might change your position, and you have to be open to doing that as well. And so you're right. That's why when I saw that Andrew Yang was on the Joe Rogan Experience, I said, I'm going to, even though he was on the Democratic primary and the ticket at the time, I said, I've got to listen to this guy. I got to give him a chance. I already knew, I think I knew a little bit about his idea about universal basic income, and the conservative in me kind of fights against that sort of thing. And, but I listened to him, and I thought he was very reasonable, had a lot of great ideas. He's very smart, had a lot of great insight into how automation is going to change the landscape of the workforce in the country. And that's why I follow him on Twitter, and that's why I know what he's saying right now, and to your point, I do listen to both sides, especially when there's a very hot polarized topic going on like the U.S. elections.
Yeah. Do you still listen to mostly conservative radio and watch conservative news? Like, what does your information diet look like right now?
Yeah, that's a good question too. The information diet right now, I don't listen to radio talk host anymore, really. Mostly what I listen to or listen/watch is on YouTube, and I do watch and listen to The Hill, The Rising, with what are their names? We got
Crystal Ball and
Sagar. That's right.
Sagar and Jensen.
Yep. And they're great, and they're both Sagar is a Republican and Crystal is a Democrat or conservative liberal, and so they have a great yin-yang sort of push-pull about them. And I watch Brett Weinstein's Dark Horse podcast with his wife Heather, and I'll catch a Joe Rogan here and there, depending on who he's got on. And that's the great thing about listening or watching Joe Rogan's, right? You never know what he's going to touch on. You never know how the guest leans, unless it's somebody political in nature, like an Andrew Yang or a Tulsi Gabbard. But other than that, they get into politics a lot, and it can be many different sides of arguments. And you got Jamie back there throwing things on the screen, in real time. So there's a lot of that. Some Ben Shapiro, some Dave Rubin on the Rubin Report. And if I watch TV at all, I'll try to bounce back between like Fox News and CNN and NBC, especially now. I think during the election is probably the most I've watched cable news in a very long time, and I tried to bounce back and forth, and I was surprised at how much Fox News seems to have they're not the Republican news source really anymore, or at least they're trying to be. Give a clearer look into President Trump, I would say.
Yeah.
And of course, he doesn't like that. So
yeah, that's been a hot topic on Twitter for sure, is
the
Fox News coverage. And I have my own theory about it, which we can maybe kick around here and see if you agree with. But
sure,
there's part of me that believes that the higher-ups in Fox, realized what it would do to the country to support Trump in his voter fraud claims without kind of hedging that bet a little bit. It still has the potential to really tear this country apart if things like, imagine now if his voter fraud claims were confirmed and the results were switched and President Trump was now our president-elect.
Right.
That to me represents a very scary scenario. And I'm not crazy about Joe Biden. My fear of this election, I think a lot of people were afraid of Trump winning. My fear was really more based in what is going to happen. How are people going to react?
Right.
I don't really see, there's some daylight between Biden and Trump just in terms of how presentable they are, I guess. How, like how they represent the country. There's definitely a difference. But in terms of like policy, Biden wants to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. The Iran nuclear deal is probably going to be rejoined. These are all things that I support. Yep. But how much more of a stimulus check would we have gotten this year if Biden was president? I don't know. Without a full majority in Congress, it's probably safe to say we wouldn't have gotten another one. I'm not really convinced that he is going to be this populist leader that's going to change the situation for America. So my fear this election was, how are people going to react to the results? And I think to go back kind of to the beginning of this, a little long-winded answer, I think Fox News kind of sensed that things were in the balance right now, that things were about to be shifted if they have half of the country's minds kind of in their hand. And if they were to feed into what Trump was saying, we could have seen some real violence, and we still might, who knows? But I don't know. I think that their better nature kind of came out here in the last few weeks. Do you have any thoughts on that? And this is all just speculation too.
Yeah,
so
I know. I think you're probably mostly right. And what I don't know is when they started to look and feel that way. To my, like to me, it could have been 6 months ago, it could have been 2 years ago, because I really wasn't watching cable news during this 4-year period. I tried to get away from it, knowing that it's super partisan, and knowing that it's like, unless you have time to listen to all of them all the time, you shouldn't really listen to any of them any of the time because you're going to end up on one side or the other. And it's not necessarily what their opinions are, because you can get, of course you get their opinions, but it's what the information they share or the lack of information that they share. So typically what I would know is, or what I thought is, Fox News would only share information that looked good to Republicans and bad to Democrats, and CNN, MSNBC, all the other ones, CNN, NBC, CBS, shared only what would look good to Democrats and look bad to Republicans. So I tried to stay away from it. So I honestly don't know how long they've kind of behaved that way. I know I've personally felt it was odd when they called Arizona for Trump. And I thought, wow, that's early, when I saw what percentage of the vote was in. Yeah. So I was concerned there about, did they try to go into the middle but miss the mark and kind of went, they kind of, shot right past it. And now they look like they're trying to fit into that narrative against Trump. Or are they really, really, really trying to tell the truth as they see it and just report the facts? I'm not even sure of it right now, but you might be right. There could have been a deeper sense of what was coming, and they were trying to get ahead of that and trying to maintain relevancy, because they've been what, the number one cable news source for a long time now. And maybe they're just they're probably looking out for that bottom line and trying to maintain supremacy, right?
Yeah, no, it's hard to make money when the country's in a violent civil war. It's not good for your dollars. So
yeah, we may have just discussed it way too much there. That's probably all it was about.
yeah. That's where we can end that. Maybe let's just get out of the world of speculation then and talk about some of the reaction. One of the things that has worried me about the post-election environment is how liberals are throwing Trump voters under the bus. There seems to be a lot of anger. People are making lists. People are calling Trump voters monsters, and there's like this dehumanization going on right now of Trump voters that really concerns me. And I don't know, do you want to say who you voted for this year? I'm not sure who it is, but did you vote for Trump this year?
I did not.
You did not?
I same fear as you. What would happen if, really, I feared the reaction if either of them were elected. So that's, again, the whole reason we joined Unity, I think, is to try not to get one of them elected. But I ended up writing in Tulsi Gabbard.
Nice.
This is probably the vote I've considered the most carefully ever in my lifetime. And I listened to, I think Brett Weinstein did the same thing. Kimberly, who is our podcast team lead, she had mentioned to me that she was going to likely vote Joe Jorgensen, if nothing else, to ensure the Libertarians received hopefully more funding in the next election cycle. And I listened to a lot of those different arguments, and I even considered voting for Trump, but I had to do my best to stick with my conscience this time. And I had to write in Tulsi, who I thought, like, she's who I voted for in our Unity ballots. I voted for Tulsi and Dan Crenshaw, which is what won the ranked choice voting in Unity, right? And I had to stick with that. I think out of the two of those, Dan Crenshaw and Tulsi, that's the one I would like to be considered the leader, be considered the president.
Cool. Yeah, maybe I'll give some background on who I voted for, because I don't think I've announced or even talked about it on this podcast. But I actually, with Todd, our sound engineer for Unity Now, we're both in California. So we did a vote pact, and he was a would-be Trump voter. I was a would-be Biden voter. we both agreed to not vote for either of the duopoly candidates. So like Kimberly, I settled on Joe Jorgensen to help get to that 5%. And, you know, if I was in a swing state like Pennsylvania, I would probably have voted for Joe Biden just because I personally believe that Trump represents a greater danger to our country than Biden does. You know, Biden is a more passive danger to me, and Trump is a more active danger. They're both dangerous, but I feel like Trump might get us there quicker, and we might disagree on that completely. But yeah, that's how I went.
Yeah, I think I would disagree on that. But I'm willing to listen to this argument. And as you know, I've been wanting to speak with someone about this specific topic for a while.
Let's go down it.
I think it's interesting because I see, so the danger in Trump, I see it as, I think you kind of summarized it very well, an active danger. So, but with him, I think you get what you see. So he's tweeting, you know, we all know he's holding the phone. There's no political person or PR person that's holding his phone or has his Twitter account. Like, that's him. You see exactly what he's thinking. Now, it's crazy sometimes, and it's he's a buffoon at sometimes. But like we all feared, or at least a lot of people feared. I'll try not to say things like we all, right? Because that's one of the problems. But a lot of people feared when he engaged with North Korea that we'd be at war. We didn't. A lot of people feared when he engaged with Iran, we'd be at war, and we didn't. Now, some might say that's lucky. Some might say, well, we exerted our power and they backed down and that was his plan all along. I think the problem there is you don't really know exactly what his plan was beyond what the result was. So he'd probably say, well, that was his plan all along. Who knows? Maybe. That's the thing. I don't really know if he would ever use the nuclear arsenal. And I think that's a lot of people liken the danger to him to, you have a crazy man with his hands on the trigger sort of thing, or his fingers on the trigger. So, but I see that side of the argument. I'm just not sure. And I think the reason I believe Biden is the greater danger is because Biden's not the danger at all. You're talking about a man who a lot of times doesn't seem to really know where he's at or what's going on. Yeah. So think about the hundreds, if not thousands of people that will surround him and that will generate the narrative and what he sees as the truth every day if he's the president, and what he will believe and what he will take action on if he's allowed to do so. Could be this totally progressive left-wing, extreme left-wing sort of agenda.
You're talking like Antifa extremists, not like Andrew Yang progressive. We're talking
not like
left.
Andrew Yang. Yeah. I should be careful there. So I mean the extreme left, and likely the same things you hear about the extreme left. So though that's like the people that are making the lists or want to make the lists of the Trump voters, or just the Trump campaign workers or administration workers. Like, I consider those type of people the extreme left. And if they are surrounding Biden and they're making all the decisions and all the recommendations, I don't think he'll know which way is up, which way is down. And I think that's the recommendation. So it's you have no idea what's going on. I think we as the country will have no idea what's going on, what's being said behind closed doors. So I think that's more of a death by 1,000 cuts sort of scenario. Whereas Trump, he might kill you outright, and we might survive another 4 years with general economic prosperity, barring a recovery from the pandemic, or barring a non-recovery from the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I totally hear your concerns and I share them. But let me just run back what you said to make sure I have it.
Sure.
So you're saying that with Trump, what we're getting is someone who knows who he is and tells us who he is. He's not hiding behind anything. He's not, well, maybe let me contrast that against what Biden is, because I think that makes it clear. So Biden, what you're saying is he doesn't know what he stands for, and the people that will have his ear and potentially be swaying his narrative or his plans is the true fear. It's not Biden himself. It is his likeliness to acquiesce to people who have his ear. Whereas with Trump, you're getting something that is more defined and maybe a little brash and sometimes obnoxious, but you know what he is. Is that accurate?
I think for the most part, yeah. For instance, he said we're going to build a wall, you know, and you knew why he wanted to eliminate illegal immigration into the country. And he did it, or at least he started it for the most part. So that was that's feeding to a lot of the Republican conservative base. And then you can argue whether or not that should be done or if we should reform the immigration laws. But with Biden, he might say one thing one day, and then I believe he might say a totally different thing another day. And I don't think either of those might be the thing that he believes. I don't know what he believes because, like he's been in politics for 40 years. So I think he believes whatever he's told will get him power and keep him in power.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. And I guess there's one thing I want to go back to after this, but first I'll make my counter argument as to why I believe Trump is the bigger threat.
Yeah.
So I agree with everything you're saying, but the thing that really frightens me about Trump is what he opens the door to. So I find him to be obnoxious. I find his character to be reprehensible. I can't stand who he is, but he is not the Hitlerian dictator, authoritarian that people make him out to be. He's not, he is more concerned with being liked than he is with being all powerful, I think. And I think that's been a mischaracterization of him by people on the left, unfortunately. And I think what it could do is, I think he is providing a playbook or opening the door to a person in the future who uses his same tactics, but is really actually smart and really actually knows how to be an authoritarian and really wants that power. So I guess for me, the reason I would support Biden over Trump is because of that. I would prefer a return to normal, something resembling normal, than I would having that door be left open.
Yeah, so well said. And I can hear what you're saying. So and you're right, he's got a playbook, so to speak. And a lot of people have talked about his playbook. Some very smart people have laid out what he did to get elected and having these rallies across the country and going directly to the people that way and going directly to the people on Twitter is how he rose so quickly through the Republican primary and ended up on the ticket and getting elected, right? And you're right, he's egocentric. He worries about how people perceive him, and he wants to be liked and he wants to be viewed as a winner, right? That's always the thing with him. You can go back to the Apprentice shows if you ever watched that, and he always talks about being a winner versus being a loser. So I see what you're saying. So if he showed a way to get to power, get to this extremely powerful office with these tactics, then that puts a playbook in the hands of some potentially dangerous and evil people.
Yeah, imagine someone who doesn't care if they're liked, and just want like that. I feel like that we're going to see at least a candidate try to make that play sometime in the future, whether it's, I don't know, it's hard to make that prediction. It's hard to say who it would be, but I feel like it's pretty likely that, and it could be for someone from the left even, it doesn't have to be a conservative. It could be someone on the left who has identified what Trump did and who is not concerned with being liked, who is not concerned with that thing and just wants to, have their way.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And you're right. I think that is the danger, one of the dangers. And is that already passed though? I mean, cause he got to the office. Now he's one of the few sitting presidents who likely isn't going to win re-election, and maybe that proves the people's power to kind of realize the danger, but was the damage done? What if somebody got to power in that way that was truly evil and all they needed was 4 years to completely install, an authoritarian sort of rule over the country.
Yeah, for sure. I guess we'll find out, man. Hopefully,
Well,
hopefully not.
I think that's the whole, that's why we're sitting here having this conversation. And that's why you and I have podcasts. That's why we do the Unity Now podcast. That's why we're part of the Unity movement. That's why we believe in it so much.
Mm-hmm.
It's this sense that we have to stop waiting around and looking to those with power, those with authority, and waiting on them to do what's best for us. It's this idea that we are the ones who we've been waiting for.
Exactly.
And it's like you have to stop for a minute and realize that you're the one that has to do something. Now, that doesn't mean we have to run for office necessarily, but the more people we can expose to the duopoly, as it's called, and the dangers of both systems and both parties, the more we can expose the country to this idea of unity and this idea that we are all Americans, and we probably do agree on a lot of things, and the things we disagree on are very little, and we can have nuanced conversations about those.
Yeah, well put, Toby. I agree 100%. Yeah, I think that's it right there. There was one thing, we're kind of nearing the end of our time here already, but there is one thing that I really wanted to touch on. As you know, you voted for Trump in 2016, correct?
Correct.
So as someone who has voted for Trump, and someone who considered possibly voting for Trump again, what are your thoughts on people on the left saying that Trump voters are racist and that they are, by voting for Trump, they are themselves racist, or at the very least condoning racism?
That's a good question. I think the idea that this kind of piggybacks right into the idea that the U.S. is systemically racist, and I don't believe that. I believe there was a time when the U.S. was systemically racist, and I think that doesn't mean there isn't racism, and it doesn't mean there aren't racist people that likely voted for Trump. I'm sure there are still many, many racist people. As somebody that voted for Trump in 2016 and somebody that could have voted for him this year, I can tell you I don't believe I'm racist. But to label me one because I'm in this group is you're getting into this identity politics, this group identity theory, and you're not having that discussion with individuals anymore. Once you can label any kind of group evil in your mind, that's when you can dehumanize them. Mm-hmm. And that's when you can justify any course of action to fight back against them. Right. And that's how, that's the story of Hitler and the Nazis and what they did to the Jews in World War II. And, it's like people think that this idea of evil is people like Hitler, and that's a far gone conclusion. That's something of many, many decades ago. Something like that could never happen again, and all of that's false. This line of good and evil runs right down the middle of every one of us. We all have the capability and the capacity for that kind of evil, and once you believe in this group mindset where these people or this group of people are the evil ones, they're the racists, or they're the unclean ones, the dirty ones, as the Nazis basically labeled all the Jews, then you can dehumanize them. And then before you know it, you're a guard at a prison camp. Yeah. You're a guard at an internment camp, and you're exterminating other people. Like, that's where these lists lead, that's where you can get a group of people together, and before they know it, they're doing something so evil they don't even recognize themselves. So I think that's just dangerous. Number one, the left doesn't need to label all the Trump voters any one thing, and the right doesn't need to label all the Biden voters any one thing. They're all Americans, and there are a lot of different reasons people voted for Trump, and there's a lot of different reasons people voted for Biden. And if you want to know what those reasons are, you need to do it the old-fashioned way and actually talk to people. Yeah,
I love that. And, I don't want to get off the rails into the systemic racism thing. That's probably another 15, 10, 20-minute discussion. And
yeah.
I do want to just input there that I see where you're coming from about the systemic racism. I've heard arguments saying that, it's not exactly true. And I'm probably somewhere in the middle between that argument and the argument that it's everywhere. I do believe that it is exaggerated to some degree, and people look for the boogeyman where he doesn't exist. And, I think that, but I also think that there's something to be said for, how people of color or, people of color, black people, brown people, how they are lacking certain opportunities. And, what is that a cause of systemic racism? Is that a cause of economic inequality? I don't know. I don't know enough to parse those things out.
Yeah.
So, I want to get back to the other point, but I just wanted to make that known as my position here for your sake, for the listener's sake, to see that we don't agree on everything, but we can still have this conversation.
And real quick, again, I don't want to keep us down another rabbit hole or another tangent, but I ended up in a Facebook debate with somebody. I deleted Facebook recently after watching The Social Dilemma and your episode on Unity Now with the gentleman that used to work at Facebook. But before that, I had gotten into a debate about systemic racism with somebody that kept posting huge stories that had 30, 40 different reports and facts and figures. And so I believe I did the work, at least in arguing with this person. And I read every single thing they posted. I went to every single study they shared. And after having read through everything they shared, which was multiple stories and multiple responses, there are certainly conversations to be had about the lasting impact of systemic racism in the country and what it's done to set people of minority origins, set them back. I would definitely agree to that. Mm-hmm. And we need to have a definitely a nuanced conversation as a country around those topics. Yeah. You can't just dismiss everything around that discussion and say it doesn't exist anymore, so we're fine. But you can't also say, well, 70 million people are racist and all cops are racist and all those things, because again, you're not allowing for any kind of conversation.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think that is the tragedy, is that conversation just isn't happening. We can't figure out what level of systemic racism there is in society because nobody wants to present their side reasonably, and it gets back to the thing of calling, like you said, 70 million Trump voters racist. Well, by calling them racist, like you said, you're dehumanizing them. You're kind of setting the stage for something really terrible in the future. And who knows, how far that will go. Who knows if it can be kind of brought back in, reeled in. I know Biden has said in his speeches that that we need to stop looking at the other side as the enemy. And I was very reassured by his choice of words after the election. We'll see if that carries on. But yeah, calling the other side racist, 70 million people, they are not going to come to the table in good faith after they've been called racist. And now you're just making the likelihood of a reasonable dialogue dive. It's like I posted on Instagram or something, why would a racist Trump voter ever want to join a progressive team in the future if they think that they're not wanted? We're just alienating people. And regardless of if something violent and terrible comes of that, we are at least making conversation less likely by having that level of name calling,
Agreed. And that's where we've been headed all this time. And that's, again, Trump was a symptom of these problems and not the cure back in 2016. That's something I think a lot of Unity team members all agree on. And that's what's led us to this point. So then the question is it getting any better, or is it just getting much, much worse? And that's I don't know, that's a worthwhile discussion probably at some point as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it was great talking with you, man. Is there anything you want to end on? Maybe we can end on with something hopeful. What I've asked this before in the Unity Now podcast. I don't think I've asked it here on my show, but what are you hopeful for? What's giving you some hope for the future right now?
Things like the Unity movement, where you had tens of thousands of people joined together for a common cause because they saw a common threat. And that common threat was not one person or one group. That common threat was this idea that our only choice every year or every 4 years is red or blue, or Democrat, Republican. And that many people coming together, I think, shows you that America is not vastly asleep under the guise of the Matrix, so to speak. There are many, many people who are watching and listening and are trying to absorb the actual factual information surrounding things like this. So when it comes to like 2024, for instance, I am encouraged that the Unity movement and the Unity Now podcast and what you and I are involved in, we're going to be able to focus on two things, which is bring the country together, but also help the country understand over the last few decades what we've all done in creating such an important office of the presidency, and how it was never actually meant to be that way. And if we can have that conversation and realize that the president is, while that person is important, they're not supposed to be nearly as important as we make them, is if we can stop relating our respective teams to two different people and more relate it to the groups in, the House and the Senate and our local and our local state governments, then we can all start to decompress a little bit from this hyper partisan conversations every year. Now, we'll still vote for the president, but it shouldn't be nearly as important as we make it. And it shouldn't be all we talk about for an entire year. And we shouldn't all fear this time.
Yeah, I love that, man. Well put, Toby.
Well, I tried.
Yeah.
Hopefully all that works.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So I guess here, normally I sign off and encourage people to listen to the EW podcast, but I think it's fitting that we direct people to Unity Now, since we are both team members on that volunteer podcast. So you can find Unity Now on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you listen to podcasts. And you can also, if you're interested, look into Unity Movement at articlesofunity.org. And I will make sure to provide all those links in the notes for this show. Yeah. Thanks for joining me, Toby. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah. Thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me on. It was fun.
Yeah, I had a great time.
Thanks for tuning in. For more conversations and content like this, be sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you prefer: Apple, Google, Spotify, etc. If you prefer to consume your podcasts in video format, you'll find full episodes and clips on YouTube. Follow the Unity Now podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram by clicking the links in the description below, and be sure to sign up and get involved at articlesofunity.org. Bye.